Russia and America sign a landmark treaty slashing their nuclear arsenals. Both leaders hail a new era of friendship and cooperation. Outrage, the Marines' first reaction to that sniping back home. Murphy's metatarsal misery, England's toe jinx, strikes again. And the ultimate makeover, turning the Queen's back garden into a concert stadium.
And in London and the South East, the £100 million plot to defraud St Paul's. And were these beatings covered up by prison doctors? We investigate Wormwood scrubs.
Good evening. Russia and America went further than ever before today in pledging a new era of friendship and cooperation. The occasion was the signing in Moscow by George Bush and Vladimir Putin of a treaty that makes deep cuts in their arsenals of strategic nuclear weapons. It'll cut them by 2/3 by 2012. After the ending of the Cold War, it signalled the end of the arms race. At the height of the Cold War, each of the superpowers had up to 15,000 strategic nuclear warheads aimed at the other. That number's fallen since the collapse of communism, and under the new treaty, it'll fall even further to around 2,000 warheads each.
George and Laura Bush arrive for an informal dinner at home with the Putins, a chance for the two first couples to cement what seems to be a genuinely warm relationship. This morning, President Bush had looked far less relaxed, even slightly awestruck as he entered the Kremlin for the first time. Its splendour was designed to be imposing. But Vladimir Putin soon put him at ease. Russia's staunch support for the US since September the 11th has created an unprecedented friendship between former Cold War foes. They even shared a joke as they prepare to sign the treaty they say will make the world a safer place. The historic nature of the moment was only slightly dented when the cameras caught the American president removing his boiled sweet. Then the two leaders put their names to an agreement to scrap 2/3 of their nuclear arsenals over the next decade. It's not a deal Russia's military leaders are happy with. They complain Washington will simply store the weapons for later use. Mr. Bush gave this reassurance.
It's an historic and hopeful day for Russia and America. It's an historic day for the world as well. President Putin and I today ended a long chapter of confrontation and opened up an entirely new relationship between our countries.
For Russia's part, Mr. Putin said he had no doubt that their relationship had taken on a totally new quality.
Despite the smiles and the talk of a new era at the Kremlin today, there are still many issues to be resolved. Would Russia still support the US if it attacked Iraq? And is Moscow helping Iran gain nuclear technology? This small, heavily policed protest in Moscow symbolised the lingering mistrust among Russians too, unconvinced of what they have to gain from Mr. Putin's support for the West.
Nice to meet you.
The two leaders insist they can address all those issues as friends. There have been many false dawns in this relationship before. The key now will be to make it last. Caroline Wyatt, BBC News, Moscow.
And Brian Hanrahan is in Moscow. Now, Brian, was Mr. Putin ever really in a position to bargain over nuclear weapons? Russia simply can't afford to stay in the arms race.
Not at all. America wrote the terms of this treaty and allowed him to accept it with all the grace he could muster. And that's because he desperately needs to stop running a big Russia policy. He can't afford nuclear arsenals to modernize them. He can't afford big armies and a big policy. He needs all his effort, all his energy to deal with the economy here. The country is making some progress, but it really is in a mess. There's corruption, there's bribery, there's criminal cartels, there's mismanagement. He needs all the effort and energy he can to be put into that in order to make progress, because if he doesn't, that's where his electoral strength comes from. If people aren't seeing economic results, they won't vote for him, he's out of office, and he'll be followed by, well, heaven knows who.
There was much mention at this summit of Iran and some disagreement on it, but not a word about Iraq. Now, what do you read into that?
Not a peep. I think that George Bush is trying to pull a flanker on this one. Do you remember last year when he was going around Europe and there was absolute uproar about the ABM treaty and missile defence, and he silenced that by getting President Putin effectively to drop his opposition? I think he's trying a similar tactic on Iraq. There's no reason, if there is a genuine pragmatic Russian policy, why it should support Iraq. That's a hangover from the old days. If Russia's economic interests in Iraq, their debts and their contracts, their future contracts are protected, then why shouldn't President Putin throw in his lot with George Bush if he wants to? It may take a lot of bargaining, but if that bargaining can be sorted out, George Bush could really change the terms of debate on the whole Iraq policy.
Brian Hanrahan, thank you. Pakistan is to carry out a series of missile tests this weekend at a time of deep tension with India over the disputed region of Kashmir. But both countries insist that the tests are routine. Pakistan's President, General Musharraf, said today he didn't want war with India. In Kashmir, more evidence has emerged of the destruction caused by the regular shelling between the two sides. Fergal Kayne reports from the Pakistan-India border.
If the two nuclear powers go to war, this is the last place to be standing. The Pakistani front lines near Zafirwal. Just across the fields from us, the Indian positions. A huge army has been assembled on the other side, ready to attack. We were taken along a narrow lane near the Indian positions.
Far away. You can see their post. I will show that star.
Oh, right, over there.
On the left.
Both sides have been shelling every day. It's the civilians like these who are suffering most. The mortar landed here and killed my child, said Salima Bibi. Baby Ikra was playing in the yard when she died. Just as on the Indian side, thousands have fled their homes and land. Village after village has been abandoned. It is a morbid atmosphere, the air thick with the stench of animals killed in the shelling. But it's the human cost that confronts one at every turn. Here, a woman killed on her own doorstep. The rhetoric has been scaled back by India in the last 24 hours, but on both sides there is still great anger.
India may have moved to ease the tension, but here in the Pakistani lines they're taking nothing for granted. There are 750,000 Indian troops facing them on the other side of the border. The fear is that the danger of war hasn't vanished, it's merely been postponed.
Today we were shown Indian artillery shells fired at Pakistani villages. Today Pakistan announced it would test rockets that could destroy Indian cities. Nobody here is trying to hide the seriousness of the situation.
Things are happening here. It has all the potential to get into war. So that is the kind of situation here.
People are still leaving the border area. These villagers found whatever transport they could to escape the shelling.
What happened to our village is that the Indians have been firing at us day and night. Our homes have been burnt, our livestock destroyed. That is why we are leaving.
If the world can't make the two powers see reason, these convoys will become a great terrified flood of humanity. Fergal Kayne, BBC News on the Pakistan-India border.
Here, the government has dismissed as dangerous and daft comments by the Conservative leader Iain Duncan Smith on the fate of the Sangat asylum seekers. Mr Duncan Smith said he was deeply opposed to any deal with the French that would lead to refugees coming to Britain in return for the camp's closure.
Iain Duncan Smith arrived in Wales to tell party members the Conservatives must speak out for vulnerable people. That doesn't include asylum seekers at the Sangat camp, apparently. He claims Britain is at the end of its tether, and the idea that people from Sangat might come here in return for the camp's closure has the French laughing at us over their breakfast tables.
This deal would be a disaster. It is quite wrong to try and get the camp closed down by taking half or all of those who are in the camp at the moment. That would simply make the problem here in the UK even worse. We've told them that what they need is this bilateral agreement with the French, which we had when we had last in government and which they no longer maintained.
The future of the asylum seekers at Sangat has not been decided, say the British government, who claim no deal has been struck with the French. Negotiations won't even get underway until a new French government is elected in June, say Downing Street. The Tory leader's comments have been attacked by ministers here.
To demand that not one asylum seeker is allowed in, whatever the merits of the case, is as dangerous and as daft as to take the opposite extreme, that everyone should be allowed in.
Whatever the government say, they aren't exactly immune to the charge of exploiting Songat for political gain. There's been a steady flow of leaked stories about how Labour plan to toughen up the system, perhaps even turning back asylum seekers if no deal is reached with the French.
Calm down is my message to the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and the Tory leader. Stop upping the ante. These are real people with real families and real economic aspirations.
Until today, Iain Duncan SMith has avoided highlighting the asylum issue, not wanting to be accused of jumping on bandwagons like his predecessor, William Hague. Now, though, the Tory leader says the Songat camp is a potent symbol of how Britain is being taken for a ride. It's hardly compassionate conservatism, but then it's not a million miles from the government's private view either. Laura Trevelyan, BBC News, Conservative Central Office.
Now, just a day after statistics showed consumer spending is booming, new figures suggest the rest of the economy is stagnating. Figures from the Office of National Statistics show that gross domestic product, the total amount of goods and services that Britain produces, stood still for the first 3 months of this year, meaning that output has now failed to grow for a full 6 months. Our economics editor, Evan Davis, is here. Evan, yesterday, shopping like there's no tomorrow. Today, made to sound like the sick man of Europe. What's going on?
It is very confusing at the moment. I mean, it could be that the statistics are just plainly wrong. It wouldn't be the first time for that to happen. But it is quite possible to have a boom on the high street and a recession on the industrial estates. And that's because there's always just much more to an economy than what consumers are spending. There's what companies spend, buying new machines, robots, factories, etc., and that's going down. And then there's what foreigners spend, exports. Those too apparently are falling. Now, that's all keeping the economy slow despite this very, very busy consumer on the high street spending money.
So can the government risk raising interest rates to choke off the consumer boom if it'll slap industry down?
Well, I think they may raise rates. It's the Bank of England, of course, who'll make that decision. Of course, they have to keep their eye on inflation. And one of the really odd things about the economy at the moment is, despite consumer spending, there doesn't seem to be very much inflation. But I think the Bank of England might say, goodness, this consumer spending may be getting out of hand. Let's nip it in the bud now. The other thing is we have this delayed reaction. At the end of last year, we had a number of interest rate cuts. Those may not even have taken effect yet. And the Bank of England might be saying, goodness, if the consumers are spending this much money before they've even really started responding to the last few cuts in interest rates we had, we better raise rates preemptively now to stop it getting completely out of hand. So don't spend all that money if you're a mortgage holder. You may face higher rates quite soon.
That's if you've got any money left. Evan Davis, thank you. The University of Cambridge has promised a full inquiry into allegations that its researchers inflicted substantial suffering on monkeys during medical research. Anti-vivisectionists have released pictures which they claim shows that the university has been carrying out horrific experiments on the animals. Yesterday, the Prime Minister stressed the importance of animal research in advancing medical science. The Royal Marine Commander in Afghanistan has warned of more attacks on British troops after yesterday's firefight in which the Marines shot dead 2 men. Brigadier Roger Lane also told the BBC that his troops were outraged by recent criticism of him and Operation Condor.
At Camp Gibraltar, the men of 4-5 Commando making the most of some downtime. They know it won't be long before they're ordered back into the mountains. Almost no combat so far, but they haven't forgotten why they came here. Nor as their commander. Roger Lane has been under fire more than his men. In his only television interview this week, he told me how it felt to be sniped at.
As a personal attack on me, of course, I find that wholly unwelcome, particularly for my family. I've got a 6-year-old son who thinks his daddy's coming home early. And of course, that isn't the case. But I can't be distracted by all of that. I've got 1,600 men here who are on operations, and I've got to make sure that I focus on the job, and that's exactly what I'm doing.
Well, what about the men? What impact has this had?
My men are outraged by it, to be honest. They think it's grossly unfair and inaccurate.
The focus from now on is likely to be counterinsurgency. 2 assaults on his men operating in the remote southeast have raised the possibility of hit-and-run tactics by gunmen trying to disrupt Afghanistan's peace process.
The Al-Qaeda and Taliban learnt the lessons of Anaconda, that if you go and take on the largest military-industrial complex in the world, in ground that suits them, then they're going to suffer a defeat. And I think that they will reflect upon that and probably come back in a more insurgent role in the future.
And tonight comes word of dramatic developments elsewhere. Coalition troops, mostly American, have raided a compound near Kandahar, killing one man and taking 50 others away. They say they believe the compound was being used to harbour Al-Qaeda or Taliban leaders. Paul Adams, BBC News, Bagram.
The number of prisoners in England and Wales has risen above 71,000 for the first time. Prison reform groups warned that prisons were now seriously overcrowded. They're particularly concerned about women's prisons. A senior prison service official has warned they'll be full in 2 months. 400 more staff at the collapsed broadcaster ITV Digital have lost their jobs. They were employed at its call centre in Plymouth. 150 staff are still employed there to deal with calls from remaining customers. Consignia, the post office, has denied claims that it's planning to cut daily postal deliveries to a further 2,000 Scottish households. The postal watchdog, Postwatch, had claimed Consignia was looking to expand its exclusion list, addresses to which it's not obliged to deliver letters every day. England's injury-hit World Cup squad has suffered a further blow. Midfielder Danny Murphy, who earlier replaced Steven Gerrard, is returning home with a broken bone in his left foot. Murphy's replacement, Trevor Sinclair, is on his way back to the Far East just 48 hours after returning to the UK. Our sports correspondent David Eads is with the England squad.
Down and now out, his worst fears confirmed. Danny Murphy hobbled out of Jeju University Hospital, his World Cup already over before the tournament has even started. It took a bone scan here in the radiography room to reveal the damage. Just like David Beckham, a fractured metatarsal. Well, it's taken the very latest equipment to show that there was any break at all, and we're told it is a very fine fracture, but of course that's more than enough to put a footballer out of the World Cup. As for the other injured players, both Beckham and Dyer stayed away from the latest squad training session, and Nicky Butt is still being nursed back to fitness as Sven's best-laid plans continue to go awry.
No, I'm not fed up at all. I'm looking forward to the World Cup. England is a great football nation, and we have a lot of good football players, so those coming in, they will show the world that they should have been here from the beginning.
The players who have been and who are fit have been signing off this South Korean warm-up tour with a bit of gentle PR for local schoolchildren. Trevor Sinclair was sent back to England just 2 days ago, and yet tonight he's flying straight to Japan where he'll rejoin the squad, all because of Danny Murphy's misfortune. It's his turn to head for home, but he won't be coming back again. David Eads, BBC News, Jeju.
And the Irish Prime Minister, Bertie Ahern, has offered to help resolve the row between the country's football manager Mick McCarthy and the team's captain Roy Keane, but there's little sign of any reconciliation. McCarthy sent the Manchester United star home after being on the receiving end of a string of abuse. Roy Keane told the BBC he had no regrets.
Roy, do you have any regrets being sent home from the World Cup?
Destination unknown, an unrepentant Roy Keane heads for his flight out of Saipan and out of the World Cup before the tournament has even started. He refused to discuss the torrent of obscenities he's alleged to have hurled at his manager.
Feel very good. Clear conscience. And I'm happy to be going home. Happy to go home and see my family.
Any regrets at all?
No regrets.
The Ireland squad left for Japan, manager Mick McCarthy dismissing Roy Keane as history.
I will not tolerate, not being spoken to like that, but the level of abuse that was thrown at me, so I have sent him home.
Only a fortnight ago, Roy Keane was picking up an honorary doctorate at Cork University and being wished every success at the World Cup. A national hero, doubly so for captaining not just his country, but also Manchester United, which has a huge following in Ireland. The Prime Minister, Bertie Ahern, has even offered to mediate in the dispute. Some fans are still hoping against hope.
We want him to end his international career in a green jumper under a blue sky
and not under a black cloud. That's what the fans want.
Is reconciliation possible? It's not over till the fat lady sings, said one Irish FA official, adding one more cliché to yesterday's pile. He also used the A word, A for apology. But the young Irish players now being feted in Japan hardly seem to be pining for Roy Keane. George Eakin, BBC News.
The increasing problems for the English and Irish squads come just a week before the opening match of the World Cup. But they're not alone. Other teams have faced difficulties of their own. Swedish midfielder Freddie Ljungberg came to blows with a teammate after a fierce tackle in training. Daniel Kennedy of Portugal was sent home when he failed a drugs test. And Cameroon arrived 4 days late in Japan after a row over bonuses and their pilot being forced to change course. Well, David Eads joins me from South Korea. David, did all this happen at other World Cups, or is this one jinxed?
Well, this does look like a mess, doesn't it, Peter? No, I think we've seen all these things before, as you say, on other occasions, just perhaps never in quite the same concentration we're getting them at the moment. And I think when even the England coach, the scientific Swede, starts using words like destiny, certainly from the England point of view, they feel that the fates are turning against them more than a little. Obviously that's a problem for them. It's something they've got to deal with as they start planning the next stage of their route, because they leave here later today and head for Japan.
Well, they really must then be due for a change of fortune. What is the coach hoping for above all else?
Exactly that, I think, a change of luck. He knows that while the preparations here logistically have gone just about perfectly, good training facilities, a good practice match, security good as well, he knows all that has gone very well indeed, and yet he has one more warm-up on Sunday against Cameroon. He wanted to field his strongest side, he can't. He's going to have to give as many players as possible a run out, and that means that when that game against Sweden starts, he really doesn't know quite what his side's going to be capable of. So if he doesn't start getting a bit of good luck, things are going to go very badly for England.
David Eads, thank you. The Queen has been continuing her Golden Jubilee tour of Scotland, today opening the world's only rotating boat lift. The Queen looked on as the Falkirk Wheel lowered vessels more than 100 feet between the Forth and Clyde and Union canals. Linking the east and west coasts of Scotland, the lift is the centrepiece of Britain's biggest canal restoration project. And while the Queen was away, Buckingham Palace's gardens were being transformed into a giant stage for some of the world's biggest stars. Sir Paul McCartney and Dame Kiri Te Kanawa will be among the performers at two special open-air concerts for next week's Jubilee celebrations.
3, 2, 1. The countdown has reached its final stages. A remarkable conjuring act is underway. Convoys of construction lorries rumbling through the palace courtyards, a huge stage rising above the immaculate lawns. Royal Gardens transformed to concert arena.
What people will be faced with when they walk through the doors is a very clean, open stage that's transparent, so they can see through and see the gardens behind it. That's really the thing that we've tried to do, to put all this technology in the gardens but make it as invisible as it can be.
2 million people applied for tickets, 25,000 succeeded. They'll follow the route I took today, across the thick pile carpet of the bow room, over the terraces to join fellow guests from every corner of the UK.
They're all ages, all interests, and we hope that both concerts are a broad enough range of music to interest them, but also celebrate 50 years of British musical achievement.
Every one of those guests will be given a royal picnic hamper like this one. Inside, amongst other things, champagne of course, and a dish called Golden Jubilee Chicken, created especially for the occasion by the Queen's chef. The Queen, who's taken a keen interest during the planning stages, will join the audience at both events. An audience that'll include hundreds of millions around the world. The BBC spent about £3 million staging this event as the corporation's contribution to the Jubilee celebrations. They and the party hosts are keeping their fingers crossed that the weather doesn't let them down. Robert Hall, BBC News, Buckingham Palace.
And both the concerts can be seen and heard live on BBC television, radio and online. Which brings us to 10:25. I'll be back a little later with an update on the day's headlines, but now we join our news teams across the United Kingdom.
Good evening from BBC London News. I'm Asad Ahmed. A group of international conmen posing as Hollywood movie producers attempted to defraud St Paul's Cathedral out of £100 million. But today the court case all but collapsed as several gang members jumped bail.
In 1999, Cathedral Canon gave a normal and routine daily service.
But at the end of the service, two members of the congregation approached the canon and offered an enormous donation to repair the cathedral dome.
The details were taken and they were all passed on to the office side of the cathedral life, and we began to follow it up, as we would do with any member of the public who came forward in those circumstances.
The offer was for £50 million. The men were from the US and Canada. Their names carried on a company brochure they presented, claiming they were successful Hollywood film producers with that kind of money to give away.
And here is a copy of the agreement drawn up by these fraudsters for this scam. Luckily, though, for St Paul's, on the back page, there are no signatures.
The catch is in the contract. In return for £50 million, St Paul's Cathedral would have to pay £100 million into another account for 10 days. The men insisted this money wouldn't be touched. The police, though, have no doubt it would have disappeared. But the case hasn't ended in the way police hoped. Today at Southwark Crown Court, the case against one man collapsed because two others have fled to America whilst on bail. Joe Lowry was pretending to be a retired banker. Andrew Jalasolo, part of a US federal bank. Both are now in Florida. The two bogus film producers disappeared before police made arrests, which leaves just one man, Antonio Barea, facing sentence after admitting conspiracy to defraud. Gareth Furby, BBC London News.
A group of prisoners at Wormwood Scrubs is to launch an unprecedented complaint against the jail's medical service. They're about to lodge their grievances with the doctors' disciplinary body, the GMC. Complaints by prisoners of beatings are nothing new, but now it's alleged prison doctors are also failing them.
A regime of terror inside here was ignored by doctors, claimed 35 serving and former prisoners at the jail.
Prison officer in the front, who seems to be in charge of this posse of prison officers, punched me in the side of the head. The force of that made me fall over, and then all the 6 prison officers began kicking and punching me. I rang on the emergency bell and I said to them I'd like to see a doctor, which about half hour later a doctor arrived, and I told him exactly what happened, that I was beaten up by these prison officers, and he didn't seem to be that concerned about it, you know.
These pictures are of a former Wormwood Scrubs prisoner who was beaten 3 times on the same day in 1998. 3 prison officers were convicted last year of the assaults. They're part of a dossier alleging that 5 prison doctors failed to stop the beatings and sometimes failed to record, examine, or even treat such injuries adequately.
And the concern I have is that doctors over a long period of time, in fact, fail to take any appropriate action.
The British Medical Association acknowledges that there is a real crisis in caring for prisoners.
We have a number of years to go before we will be in that position that we could be proud of the service that we offer. That's not to say that the individuals providing it are inadequate, but the system itself is inadequate because of the paucity of resources that are poured into it.
Next month, the General Medical Council will consider the complaint by Wormwood Scrubs prisoners. For them, the reforms don't seem to be working quickly enough. Arlen Harris, BBC London News.
Soul singer Misha Paris watched the killer of her half-brother get jailed for life today. Jason Phillips, a 22-year-old postman, was shot in the middle of the street by Peter Hutchinson on Valentine's Day last year. Hutchinson denied murder, pleading self-defence, but it took the jury less than 5 hours to find him guilty.
We're really, really glad that he got life. It's really important that, because he knew exactly what he was doing and he shot him in cold blood, you know. And justice was definitely served today. We're really pleased.
Scores of passengers travelling on the Heathrow Express were trapped in a tunnel this evening for over an hour and a half. They spent the first 15 minutes in total darkness. A spokesman for the service said a mechanical fault caused the breakdown, but other services to the airport were running normally. Some passengers complained about the way the breakdown and evacuation was dealt with. Now, the Chelsea Flower Show has drawn to a close this evening, but not without the ritual scrum to buy the prized plants that have been on display. Tim Samuels was amongst the very middle-class mayhem looking for a bargain.
It's the horticultural equivalent of the Harrods sale. Middle England en masse in pursuit of a bargain.
I want a white astilbe.
Big bunches of flowers, cheap.
All awaiting the call to purchase from the Lord High Priest of suburban shrubbery.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh gosh, they're great. Have you ever found please? Getting out was the worst, wasn't it?
I didn't realise little old ladies could be so brutal. Having secured their spoils, the Floral Legion marched onto the streets around Sloane Square, overwhelming the tube at one point, before fanning out back to suburbia in time for Titchmarsh. Tim Samuels, BBC London News.
Tim didn't tell us if he got flowers himself. But anyway, that's it from us and from the late team. We'll be back tomorrow evening at 5:30 on BBC One. Join us then if you can. Now it's back to Peter Sissons.
And the main news tonight, Russia and America have signed a landmark treaty which will deliver deep cuts in their nuclear arsenals. George Bush and Vladimir Putin said the treaty set the seal on a new era of friendship and cooperation. The British commander in Afghanistan, Brigadier Roger Lane, has hit back at his critics, saying his men are outraged. And the England midfielder Danny Murphy has broken a bone in his foot, dealing a further blow to the injury-hit World Cup squad. Newsnight starting now, over on BBC Two, but from the 10 o'clock news. Good night.
Good evening to you. Yes, it really is May, not March, but this particular area of low pressure gave 60-mile-an-hour winds and over an inch of rain in many places. And it's going to stay with us throughout the weekend, even into the first part of next week, keeping the weather pretty unsettled and in many places keeping some strong winds going too. But eventually it'll begin to creep a little bit further away, allowing the pressure to rise in the south with a little bit of hope, fingers crossed, that things there might begin to settle down. But that, of course, is a long way off. This is the weather front that gave all the rain during the night. We'll look at that a little bit closer later on. And you can see also some unsettled weather developing in parts of Italy and Greece. They had some heavy rain this afternoon. But the main item of interest as far as we're concerned is that new lump of cloud out there on the Atlantic. It's another area of low pressure and it has our name on it. So we had that rain clearing away during the night, pretty heavy rain at that. Then loads of showers followed along behind during the day, some pretty heavy ones in northern parts. They're beginning to fade. And they will, I think, mostly pull back to western and southern coastal areas during the night, perhaps rather more in the way of rain keeping going in some western and southern areas of Scotland. And we needn't worry about the temperatures. It's going to be too windy for them to fall fairly low, 9 or 10 degrees. Tomorrow, too, a windy day. We start off fairly dry and bright in many central and eastern parts of the country. Showers right from the word go, though, in the west and near to that south coast. And I think showers will get going in central and eastern areas as well. Not as heavy as they were today. All come to that is widespread. And any showers in the west, I think, will be swallowed up by more general cloud and rain that will be coming along during the second half of the day, followed in turn out to the west by that brighter, showery weather coming back. The wind picking up, though, at the same time. That's going to make it feel on the cool side in the west, I think. 14 degrees there probably at best, but with a little bit of shelter and some sunshine, up to 18 degrees. That's not too bad in eastern areas. Now, of course, it is a weekend, and if you're thinking of taking a small boat out, bear in mind those strong winds and the fact that the sea in many places will be pretty rough. Sunday, the winds inland will die down a little bit. That's actually bad news because there'll be a lot of heavy showers around with hail and thunder and they'll become slow moving. So there could well be some local flooding. The winds keeping going though along the south coast there and also windy in the northern part of Scotland. Now, if you're lucky enough to be going away on holiday, the Mediterranean by and large is getting more settled now. I think most places will be dry with a fair amount of sunshine, the odd thundery shower perhaps in eastern areas. But once you cross the Alps, it becomes unsettled just as here in the British Isles. And on Monday too, some showers around chiefly in the north and east. That's all from me. Have a lovely weekend.